Welcome to Outland Entertainment. We are at Planet Comicon 2021. It's actually been a great show so far. We were really excited this year because we've had several of our staff, which our staff is all over the country, and then some of our artists and authors and other creators, game developers, come into the booth and hang out with us all weekend. And so we took took advantage of the situation and decided to do some interviews. I'm here right now with Christopher Helton. He is on our staff. He's in charge of games development, just in general for Outland, which is our big push right now. We've come out with several games this year, and then we brought Chris on, and he's going to help us get several more out this year, and then lots of them in the next couple years. But Chris is an entity unto himself. He existed before we brought him on, so I'm going to have him introduce himself and let you guys know a little bit about where he's coming from. If you are interested in developing a game, you have a game to develop, you can find contact information on our website at outlandentertainment.com or find us on social media, and we'll have Chris reach out to you and see what's up. So Chris, thank you for doing this interview. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, just so we know who you are and where you're coming from.
Well, I have been a game designer for about 15 years now, and I've worked for a number of smaller companies in everything from doing setting design to system design. And I worked for a while as a gaming and pop culture journalist for a couple of fairly big websites, doing reviews and general discussion about pop culture and the gaming culture and all of that kind of thing.
Cool. So besides Outland, working with Outland developing games, what else are you doing right now?
I am working on a serial game setting for a company called Gallant Knight Games. They have a game that they put out earlier this year via Kickstarter called Tiny Cthulhu. And I wrote one of the micro settings that's in the book, and I'm going to be doing a kind of extended setting for the game that's going to be done in serial increments in an online zine that they do.
Oh, that's fun. That sounds super fun.
Yeah, it's basically I have to come up with like 1,100 words on something every couple of months. So
cool.
It's fun.
So I want to point out, like Outland Entertainment, obviously we work with a ton of creators, authors, and artists, and asking you what you're doing outside of Outland is important because we support the industry in general. Like we can't do everything for everybody.
Right.
If we have an author, we can't be the only publisher, and we know that. We want them to be supported wherever they are.
Well, and the gaming business is very very interconnected. I mean, you run into you work with each other and other publishers and other designers a lot, and it'll help me in the long run because that'll mean that I'll have people to be able to draw on to work on our properties.
Yes, yeah. It's a good community. Everybody's doing something, and we just support each other's creativity and success. Fund them on Kickstarter, etc. That's really important to us. So. Cool. Okay, so you are writing 2 RPGs that Outland is publishing.
Yes.
And I guess we'll just basically talk about both of them. But why don't you tell us about, I think Paranormal Friction is coming at a later date, right?
That'll probably be next year. The first game we're going to do.
Well, why don't you tell us about that one,
okay.
and then we'll go into Action Heroes so you can spend more time on that one.
Okay. Paranormal Friction is a game inspired by paranormal romance fiction, which is a mouthful to say.
Paranormal romance fiction. That is rough, especially into the second day of a con.
Yeah, and the one thing that's always kind of amazed me when I started this game is that no one has actually used the name Paranormal Friction yet.
Yeah.
So
it's great.
It is.
It's a great title.
I spent a lot of time Googling because I couldn't believe that no one had used it. I'm like, okay, is there a novel? Is there a movie? Somebody's got to have used this name already. But I was lucky that I got to it first, so cool. But it's a sort of a subgenre of urban fantasy fiction, which is, your werewolves and your vampires, things like Anne Rice, that are in the, more or less the contemporary world, usually plus or minus a few hundred years. And then it's a mashup of that with, your standard romance fiction. It's usually, they typically feature a strong female protagonist who then gets pulled through the course of the plot of the story by her romantic entanglements.
Okay, cool. Okay, so now, and how far along are you on? When can we expect that to be done?
A lot of it, I think it's just going to depend on scheduling with the company. I expect I'll have it done probably in the spring.
So it may go on Kickstarter next year, do you think?
Yeah, sometime next year.
Okay,
definitely.
Great. Okay, so now tell us about Action Heroes, your other role-playing game that Outland Entertainment is going to be publishing.
Action Heroes is going to be hitting Kickstarter later this year. It is a game that actually, about 10 years ago, I was approached by a publisher who was looking for a licensed property, and they asked me to do the system design for the role-playing game. And unfortunately, as often happens in these sorts of things, the licensing fell through. And I was left with a system that I was never paid for.
Yikes.
So that meant I got to keep it. And
pros and cons.
Yeah, pros and cons. And, I kind of periodically would dig it out again over time and just, kind of play around with it. And probably about 2 years ago, I decided that I should, I've got this game, I should do something with it. It's because it's a good game. And I got, more active work in getting it finished up. And I did a bunch of play testing in 2019 at conventions of it, got feedback, made changes. And then the pandemic happened, and I had a lot of time on my hands for writing. So I finished that up, and currently it's in the hands of the editor. So
cool.
Yeah, I'm expecting to get
Who's editing it?
His name is Jack Norris. He's worked for a couple of big companies, Modifius. He worked on their John Carter of Mars role-playing game, and he's worked with Green Ronin Publishing on a couple of their games.
Okay, great. So do you want to tell us about the gameplay itself?
The basic idea is that my background as a gamer is that I had played a lot of what are kind of generic games that you can base. The basic idea is that you can take a sort of the core gaming mechanic and then apply it to any sort of genre or setting.
Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to come up with a game that did that, but in a simpler way. So I tried to design the game with the intention of making everything as streamlined as I possibly could. So, the combat is just a couple of rolls. Everything is kind of figured out in advance, and so most of what the numbers are. There's not a lot of things that are going to change a lot. But, it's still a robust, it's not like you're going to get the exact same situation or outcome for every situation. We're already discussing that it will probably be used for a couple of the Outland settings as to convert them into games.
Great. So it's going to be created as an engine that you can use standalone, but it's also going to be used in other IPs that we have. But is it going to be its own IP? So one of the things about Outland Entertainment, one of our specialties is Transmedia worlds, which is not just a book or a novel in a certain world, or even a series of books or a series of novels, but like books and novels. Like for instance, the Vikingverse, we've got 4 comics, we've got 2 novels, we've got a phrase book, and we also have an RPG in the works. So are we going to be expanding action heroes with other media, or
it is
no?
possible
It's more of a
because
foundation.
One of the things that because we're going through the art direction right now, which is I'm working with we've got one artist who's going to be doing all the art in the book, so it's going to give it a very consistent look throughout.
And we know who that is?
Yes, his name is Lee Oakes.
Lee Oakes. Okay.
He's worked on a couple of other Outland properties, and he's working on one of the upcoming comics too.
Okay.
He's a really good. He's got a sort of a classic comic book look to his art,
which seems appropriate for a title like Action Heroes.
It's a very strong lines, and his character work is just phenomenal.
So he's doing artwork for the RPG.
Yeah, and so I've got these. They're these 3 the sample characters that I made up to demonstrate how you make characters in it, and we decided those would then become who the characters are going to be in the artwork.
Okay.
And so I went through this. I've never actually done art direction on something of this scale before, so the first step was we made portraits of each of the characters, and they were. Jeremy said, explain the character, describe it, tell him what you want him to look like. So I dumped a novel on this poor guy, and I wrote this long. It's funny because the character write-ups are like maybe about the size of an index card, and I wrote like 4 paragraphs of description of each. And I wrote about their psychology, and then I gave like photo references of actors that I thought that these characters should look like. And then I hit the send button, and I felt guilty that I had done all of this, and that poor artist was going to just be overwhelmed and go, what in the world does this guy want? But then the art started coming back, and it was like, wow, this is exactly what I thought these characters were going to look like.
That is so cool.
And then so we had the basic portraits for each of them, and then he was like, being that the game is called Action Heroes, he said, "What kind of art do you want?" I said, "Well, them fighting and stuff." And I go,
action scenes.
I said, yeah, I want to see some fights. I want like a picture of them on a motorcycle, and I just kind of rattled off some things, and the art started coming back for those, and I was just like, wow, these are like real characters now.
Yeah.
So we've got these 3 characters that probably can end up being used in maybe a comic. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So thinking about a comic.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so what's the timeline for this? You said later this year?
Yeah, later this
probably?
year. I think we're looking at November right now for the Kickstarter. It'll be a fairly simple Kickstarter because we're just going to just fund the book. It's not going to be something with a lot of like fancy add-ons or stretch goals to add, because one of the things with Outland is we want to have things done when we go to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have a bunch of stuff added on that's just going to make the whole process go longer.
Yeah.
So whatever we end up getting together for this is what we'll present and do the Kickstarter for.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, you as the game developer for Outland Entertainment, what are you looking for? So if somebody says, I have a game and I'd like to know if you'd be interested, is there anything in particular that Outland and that you are looking for? Well, first of all, I'm sure being able to expand an IP. So if you have a game, being able to transfer it to other mediums.
I think one of the fundamental things is the ability to tell a good story with it. and that seems kind of abstract. How do you quantify a good story?
Yeah.
But and with different types of games, like for example, the Siege Command, you might not think playing a tactical combat game can tell a story, but I mean, people are when people play a really engaging game of that, they're gonna be telling stories about that.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we had a demo here at Planet Comicon earlier where the two people playing, like, we thought one person was just going to die, and she came back, and it ended up being a tie. So yeah. That's a story right there.
Right. And so I think at the heart, there should that a game should help you tell a story of some sort.
Okay.
And I think that's more important with us because we have all of these properties that are really strong stories, and we can use games to tell those stories in other ways.
Great. So, if someone would like to pitch you a game, what do you expect to have them have? A pitch. So
if somebody's just doing like just a raw pitch, I would say that they'd have to keep it fairly simple. Tell me what kind of game it is, how many people they think would be playing it, would it have any unusual materials, what would be the components of it, that sort of thing. And and then like the generic, the elevator pitch.
Elevator pitch,
like this is a game about fighting in space. Or
and it has these mechanics.
Right.
It's this many players.
Right.
It takes about this much time. So something you might see in a Board Game Geek summary.
Yeah.
So
I mean, just basically keep it as simple as possible, and then we can go on from that point and determine if it's something that it might be a good partnership with Outland.
Great. Is there anything you want to add about your game, or developing games, about you as a game developer at Outland?
Use your spell check in your your spell and grammar check in your word processing software, because you'd be surprised at the number of typos you can get in a document from a professional writer.
Yeah. Yep, it's true. I'm a writer. I do it too.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, and try to get through as much of that as possible before you send it to somebody, because it just makes everything a little longer and kind of frustrating and it also makes me a little more leery about wanting to work with somebody like that in the future.
Yeah.
So,
if they don't pay attention to detail and they don't check the work, and I would even argue that if someone doesn't get another opinion, and not your spouse or your mom, but
right.
like a professional opinion to kind of look it over and edit it, proofread it, that sort of thing. Like if you're not willing to let people criticize your work, like that's going to make it difficult to work with any publisher.
Yeah.
Period.
I mean, with Action Heroes, I did a blind play test at one point which is for if you don't know what that means, that is a play test where the designer actually has nothing to do with it. You hand off the materials to a group or groups, and the idea,
they figure it out.
Yeah, well, the idea is, that's one of the things is that you figure out in a blind play test is, am I presenting the material in a way that they don't need me being the designer, to be sitting there at the table explaining everything to them.
Yeah.
And if you haven't got to that point yet, then the game's not ready.
Yeah.
So I did a blind play test. I ran it at conventions a number of times. I ran it for friends. So, I figured out what was working and what wasn't working, and it's been a fairly smooth process, thankfully.
That's good.
Which is really unusual. Don't expect it to be a smooth process. Expect there to be a lot of things that don't work. But yeah, and that's part of why I have faith in it being that I think it's going to be something that people are going to enjoy, is because it's worked really well, and so far the people have been, that what I've explained as how the game is supposed to work and what the goals of the game are supposed to be, that people are picking that up. So I've obviously explained it right, that somebody else is getting it.
Great.
So.
Great. Well, we want to make sure people follow you. Chris is very active on Twitter. I highly recommend following him. I like following him. And you want to give us your handle for all your social media? And if you have a website?
My Twitter is @Dorkland, DORKLAND. That is actually named after my blog. I started a blog in 2003, back in the Stone Age of blogging, and it was called the Dorkland blog. So I just took that as the name of my Twitter handle. And I don't really update that as often as I used to, but I've got like 10 years worth of posts on various esoteric topics. If people and that's Dorkland or blogspot.dorkland.com.
Okay.
And then my Instagram is just chris.helton.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming to the convention all the way from Florida.
Yeah. Well, it was cooler here than it is in Florida, so.
Slightly. We appreciate you being here, though, and being a part of the team. And thank you for doing the interview with me.
Thank you very much for having me.